I used a flipped class model, meaning that I took what would typically be homework outside of class and brought it into class as group activities and collaborative work. In addition, I incorporated using facilitative teaching techniques, and instead of using that direct lecturing that a typical class is, I took that completely out of class and put it into concept videos using a new technology called the Learning Glass. The Learning Glass is a really cool new technology that allowed me to make small concept videos. It has a glass in front of me, so as I'm recording the video, the students can see my face, and they can also see what I'm writing on the glass. And the glass, there's a mirror that the video, the taping occurs through, so everything's inverted, so they can read what I'm writing, and it looks like I'm writing backwards. So I had a couple students asking if I really had the talent to write backwards, which I do not. But it has this really nice futuristic kind of look because the glass is backlit, so the writing looks fluorescent. But I think the main thing was students were able to really engage with me because they saw my face, they saw me, my movements, and my facial expressions. I was fortunate enough to have two sections of Psych 101. So I redesigned one and I continued my traditional methods in my other course. Between those two courses, the grade distribution, the final grade distribution shifted. So I had the mean or average grade in my unredesigned course was a 75.4%, but in my redesigned, in my flipped model, it increased to 81.6%. So that was actually a significant difference. And the more important thing is that in this shifted distribution, in one class I had 1 A. In my redesign class, I had 9 A's, 22 B's. So it really was a shift in the distribution. The repeatable grades, which would be a D, F, or a W, went from 18.6% down to about 10%. So I was really happy with what the overall outcomes were. But in addition to that, I felt like the students were more comfortable with the mathematics. They gained confidence in their own ability to do quantitative reasoning in the classroom. And that meant that they really engaged the material in a way that I've never seen in a statistics class I've taught before. I talked about things in that first week like mindset. Where were our students' mindset on their own math abilities? And how many students came in thinking that their math ability was already determined and that this class, yeah, like either they were going to fail at it because they're bad at math, or they're going to succeed in it because they're good at math. So I spent a lot of time really trying to make them understand that if they were in the classroom, I knew they had the ability to succeed at the material and understanding the material. I knew every student by name, so it was a 40-person section. Actually, I had 47 students. They engaged me not just in the classroom, but they sought me out outside of the classroom. So I had a lot of students that liked coming in and being part of a group. I think that it was really helpful to have them learn from their peers. And I really tried to encourage the thought that two main things, I guess. First, I wanted them to see me more as a facilitator of their learning instead of just repeating what was in the book. So that took a lot of discussion in the classroom to have them understand teaching in that way and having the class taught in that way. The second thing was, surprisingly, students that I didn't expect to take leadership roles took on leadership roles in the classroom. So you had these groups that students came in and got used to, and you had students really stepping up and becoming leaders in their group and helping their peers learn the information in a way that I think was less intimidating. The way that I've looked at it is, I want to teach every class like this. It was not only more fun for the students, but it was more fun for me to teach. I didn't have any slides I prepared. If there was something that the students got stuck on and it was clear that they needed help to reason through it, we went up to the whiteboard and we went up together. So it was no longer me talking at the students. It was a dialogue in the classroom. And I really feel like I got a lot out of it and they got a lot from it. So for me, this process of course redesign was really fulfilling. I felt for one of the first times here as faculty, I was really engaging with the students in a way where I was facilitating their learning and I was learning from them as much as they were learning from me. So it felt like a collaborative process, not only between the students and their peers, but the classroom became a dialogue instead of me speaking at them. We were really speaking with each other and allowing them a comfortable zone to increase their quantitative reasoning in statistics. I did have students that weren't comfortable coming into the classroom without being prepared for the specific activity. And that wasn't something I really prepared for. I made sure all students were prepared and had the knowledge they needed for the day's activity. And I did that through something I called the door ticket. It was a one-page document of questions that showed me they watched the concept videos and they read the book chapter that they needed and had the basic level of knowledge they needed to participate in the activity. I didn't expect students to really want that activity ahead of time. And through conversations with the students, I made them available ahead of time. Honestly, in retrospect, I have to say that I think this discouraged some of the group work that I really wanted to happen in class. So I think for that student who really wants to prepare for class, it makes them a little bit nervous. It takes them out of their comfort zone. First, I got a lot of really positive feedback. They really liked the concept videos. They liked that they could rewatch it. They also liked that I used an iPad with Apple TV and an iPen in class. So any documents they had for the classroom activities, we went over in class. They could see me writing on it as we went through it, and I saved it as a PDF for them. And I got a lot of very positive feedback about that as well. I would say one of the best instruction I got from my peers was to do something called a parking lot. So in class, if you feel like there is something that's just not occurring the way you really want it to, keep Post-it notes and give the students Post-it notes. Allow them to write their comments or feedback, and I just had them post it on the side of the door on the way out. And it was the fastest way to get real feedback from my students in real time. So it helped me address things in a very fast way. They felt like they were giving feedback anonymously because they didn't have their names on it. And it was clear if there was a pattern across students.
So the course is usually taught in a very traditional format where you have lectures, students take notes, and then they go home, complete assignments, and then at the end of the semester there's a big research paper and they have exams and stuff. And so I flipped it where students then watched a short video, probably about like anywhere 7 to 10 minutes, on a main course concept. So for example, they would watch a video on the scientific method, and then they'd come to class, and instead of having a lecture, we'd have more of a discussion about it, and then they'd have an activity to do in class. And so now the activities that were usually taken home are now done in class with more of a lecture discussion, not really a lecture anymore. I think students really liked it. Course grades did go up. So I had one course where I taught it traditional, and then I had one course where I taught it with this flip design. So in doing comparisons, students' exam grades and their final research papers and presentations in the flip design were much higher. I shouldn't say much higher. They were higher by like maybe a letter grade. And students seemed to really appreciate it based on evaluations. There were things that they didn't like, but overall they really appreciated that they could watch the video again and it wasn't a long video. So that was something that I found out very early on. They did not want long videos. They wanted short, like 7 minutes videos. And then there's something that you can do on MediaSite where you can make it publish to go where they can watch it on their phones. And I didn't find that out till mid-semester. But they really liked the fact that they could watch it on their phones, in their car. I don't know where they watched it, but on the phones. Students seem to really appreciate having the videos available to them to watch whenever. They also really liked having them available on their phones. Like, so the fact that MediaSite allows you to do this publish to go allowed them to be able to watch it on their iPads or iPods. No, not on their iPods, on their other devices, their smartwatches, their phones, whatever they watch it on. But they appreciated that, and they really appreciated having them short. So the fact that they didn't want a long video, I learned very early on. And so they really liked short videos to the point, and then they could watch them. If they didn't understand something in class, they could even watch them in class. So they really appreciated that. And they appreciated that there wasn't so much work to go home. So the work that was at home was preparing for class, not necessarily homework that they were running into difficulties and wanting to have me on speed dial to answer questions. They were doing that in class. So they appreciated that. I did see the grades go up. So what I did was I had a class in which I taught traditional, and then I had a class in which I taught the flipped way. And so in comparing the grades, the flipped class went up at least 1 letter grade, most students. I did have equal amounts of students fail the class, 1-1, but I didn't have any D's in my flipped class, whereas in my traditional class I did, and then there were less C's, more B's and A's in my flipped class than in my traditional class. One difficulty I ran into early on was that students didn't like the 1-hour videos. So I needed to adjust myself to be able to have a 7-minute quick video, because I tend to go off tangents, and I'll be like, and then this is what you could do with this, and and I needed to cut it so you can even just have a quick 7-minute video. That was one of my biggest challenges, I think, for myself. I also think getting students to buy in, I should have worked more on that in the beginning. So I think having students really understand the value of watching the video, reading for class, and coming to class prepared, they caught on to, but I don't think they caught on as quickly as I would have liked them to do. I wish that I would have had them catch on much earlier than when they finally caught on. Like, oh, I should watch those videos more than once. Yeah, you think? That I wish that I would have spent more time. So I plan on doing that in the fall, spending more time in that beginning about the value of having these videos online, and that they're short. You know, some of them will be 5 minutes, some of them 7. And I don't do all the videos because there are some great people out there that have already done this. And so they're on YouTube, and I use some of their videos. I sort of use theirs as well as mine. So, but why not use your resources? I mean, there's multiple scholars out there that are doing the same thing. So I didn't have to always put myself out there. Like, if there's somebody else explaining correlation in 3 minutes, I'm going to use them. And maybe I'll supplement with like a 2-minute or 3-minute video about how we're going to use it in our class. But if they're doing a really great job and they have, technology that allows them to show diagrams and whatnot, use those resources. Use your semester to plan and prepare and look for these other resources. Get students buy-in early. So however, whether it's in the syllabus or whether you send an email out to students, but really spend that first couple of days meeting with students to help students understand that this is a flipped classroom, but what does a flipped classroom look like? Because I don't think students really understand that, and they think like, oh, I can miss class because the lectures are available online. And so helping them understand that that's not really the best thing to do in these sort of situations is helpful.
We're always unhappy with the portfolios that students turned in at the end of the year. They were in paper. They they seemed more of an afterthought, and so we decided to go with an electronic portfolio. We also wanted to embed and integrate the portfolio into the course so that it was something that students did as they moved along through the course. And we wanted to also focus more on the threshold concept of metacognition and engage the students by having them reflect about their processes as they moved through the year. The successes that we saw were that these electronic portfolios allowed for the students to show us what they had learned. I think before with the old paper portfolios, they were tasked with telling us how they had met the goals for the course and trying to match what they had done. But with the electronic portfolios, we could see the work. We could see the metacognition as we read the portfolios. And that, I think, was successful. We also had fewer students in the failing, the D's, withdrawals and failing range. And so I think that was good. But I think ultimately, what we found was that it made a difference in those students that were kind of in the marginal area. The outstanding students, of course, still created great portfolios, but those where the student maybe wouldn't have been successful, maybe when we got their paper portfolio, we would have just seen the papers, the final papers that they had produced, and there wasn't a whole lot else to measure. With the electronic portfolios, we were able to see the process they had went through and the growth in their writing, and I think that made a difference also in success. I think they felt proud to produce something that was professional looking, and they were able to show it off both to their peers and family or whomever, and it was something to be proud of, and so I think they felt successful as well. I think they also a lot of them, when reflecting back over the year, they could see their own growth by looking at their portfolio and kind of assessing themselves. Oh, here's kind of where I started out and what I was thinking when we started the year. And now as I'm wrapping everything up and trying to turn in this portfolio, here's where I'm at now. So I think one of the biggest difficulties was training. The product that we chose was called My eFolio, and it required a lot for students to be able to get up to speed on that product. And so if they didn't make the training, I think one kind of pitfall we had initially was that we didn't schedule a makeup training. We just had an initial training. And if they didn't go to that, then we said, okay, well, you'll have to go over to the Student Technology Center and figure out how to do that. And so training was an issue. Probably the other thing that I think was a challenge was fitting in time for this new technology. We had packed schedules and information, and we should have maybe removed some things. I think we ended up doing that, cutting the things that, oh, we don't necessarily need this. But fitting in time to integrate that technology into the classroom and have students working as we move through the semester. So timing, I think, was also something. And then this past year, we went with a different portfolio technology, and that wasn't as successful. And part of it, I think, was that our redesign had been designed around the original program, and it didn't transfer well to a different program. And so I think maybe one bit of advice I would have is making sure that what you design is adaptable to different technology if you're using technology, because your technology may change. Start early. We started in summer, and I still felt somewhat unprepared as we were designing and testing in fall. So I think starting early is good. Maybe even just brainstorming, thinking about the possible challenges or things that might happen. How are we going to resolve this? And I think leaving yourself more time, because you're going to need more time to work through some of these things with the students. And maybe the last thing I would say is don't take on too much, keep it small. Otherwise, you'll get lost in the redesign and not have enough time to get your curriculum to the students.
Basically, I redesigned it, use the flipped model, kind of went in from that. Initially, this is part of the Chancellor's Office series where we're really into MOOCs, and we were gonna use sort of the MOOC model. But coming out of that, with some experimenting with a few things there, found that it's probably not good to just like do the whole course right away. You probably like to kind of phase into it a little bit, and so I found that to be more successful. And the flipping part, found that just the pure flipped piece didn't quite work. I mean, the idea of flipping a course is that the lectures are recorded and the homework is then done in the class time. So that's the sort of the flipping part. This was kind of a dramatic shift for a lot of students and made it kind of a little difficult for them. I found that I needed to go to the modified flip. This is where I also gained some experience from doing an FLC on universal design. And so I kind of incorporated a little bit of universal design into that. Also teaching another course, which was technical communications, and borrowing from English with the concept of writing in the disciplines and using, doing that sort of free write. Often you'd find that the students coming into a class have, their minds are in many different directions, and so having them come in and do a quick 2 to 5 minute sort of free write of here's what the topics are, what we're going to discuss. So keeping that in mind, I didn't have them do that in the engineering course per se, in this particular course, but keeping that in mind of like trying to orient everybody just a little bit. And so what I found was I did the sort of mini kind of lecture at the beginning of the course. I didn't summarize what was on the videos because otherwise you summarized them, I don't need to look at the videos. And I didn't work through the whole problems. They had the problems, but I just focused on what were the crucial things that people were having difficulty with, and just sort of, here in this problem, here's where this one fell apart, or something like that sort of. And this fostered some discussion and also helped align everybody on the, for the class. And then opened the rest of the class to, found it much more challenging at this point to put the energy in of the redesign into what are the particular activities you want them to do. So this became the, rather than covering the material and just having them do things, is basically more along the lines of what specifically, and trying to align those with the course goals. What are the student outcomes? How to tie a lot of those particular things together. So had some interesting types of experiences there. I found that I did this for the course, used not only just videos that I had done, but open courseware from MIT, edX, and other professors in the department. So trying to make some consistency with the course. So basically it wasn't like it was just my version of the course or everybody has a sort of different version. Try to involve the other faculty so that I had notes that the previous professor, and now the department chair and stuff who had used, and these were good. I had another professor who had recorded over some of the slides and stuff like that in more of a YouTube type of format, so it's more of the shorter kind of videos, so the students could focus on the different pieces they wanted. Khan Academy, all kinds of different other kinds of open source resources and stuff like that too, in addition to the textbook. And anyway, I found that that helped. I found that though that they really had to, I really had to put the effort into the activity and making the design of the activity so that there was a reason to look at the videos and a reason to look through the material. Well, as I said, in some cases I had to just kind of manage things just a little bit because it was, some of the students are like, well, I came to the class, you're supposed to talk to me, you're supposed to tell me what I'm supposed to do, and kind of like the expectations, because this is what they're usually used to. And so the flipped, and, as a lot of people who've used the flip model discover that you have to inform the students, kind of explain to them a little bit about what this class is about and what they're trying to do, what the expectations are, because they're a little bit different than the normal, the traditional kind of class. But what I found was that this engaged the students. What was interesting was you'd hear your lectures and the things that you had said in the lecture coming out of their mouths. I mean, basically they were saying what you had said. And so, wow, I mean, that was interesting. And it was really enjoyable. It was really exciting because you actually got to work with the students. Let's have a conversation about this rather than just this one-way type of thing where you're standing up there. I mean, I taught the course traditionally, the mini amphitheater, you have, 160 people, 200 people out there, little theater, and you ask a question and, crickets. I don't know if it's something unique to engineers or whatever, but wow, I mean, they're just like deadpan. I mean, you can't tell, hello, is this mic on? What's going on? It's just like, that was really exciting about doing the course redesign and just the engagement, the interest and stuff, and trying to see the success of designing some of these activities. There were a number of difficulties. As I said, I kind of used the term, so I had to kind of manage things just a little bit. As an engineer, there are no roadblocks. They're just kind of obstacles that you need to maneuver around. So I kind of looked at the situation more as a engineering problem rather than, these students just aren't doing what I tell them to do and blah, blah, blah. So there must be some motivation. There must be some reason why they're doing certain things. So what can I do about that? Some interesting things I found. Okay, some things that I thought were a problem, but then turned out not to be. So an example of that was I had the student, call me over and says, "Professor," yes. I said, "Yes. What is it?" I says, "Well, I think there's something wrong here with the solution." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Well, let's take a look at that." So just to back up for a second, what I assigned the homework, and one of the things I did with the homework was I gave them the homework, gave them the problem, and in a lot of cases I gave them the solution too. Well, this kind of confused the students a little bit. They were like, you gave us the problem and you gave us the solution. What did you want us to do? I said, the work. I mean, does that solution make sense to you? What do you think, type thing. And so I gave them points for just, working through the solution and stuff. And, some faculty said, well, wait a minute, you're just like giving away free points or something. I said, well, yeah, you got to understand, it's a point commodity. It's a grade commodity kind of index, type of thing. And, that's sort of the motivation for doing things. And I said, well, I just wanted them to gain some confidence and comfort with some of the stuff so that they felt like they could do it rather than, coming to the test and just basically freeze up. They're not really sure they can do any of these particular things. So anyway, back to this particular piece, they called me over and they said, well, I think there's something wrong with the solution. And so my first response is I look over it as they point out their point, there's an error there. And I'm going, oh my God. What have I done? I mean, I didn't catch that, blah, blah, blah. And so, I'm like starting to beat up on myself. And I said, no, wait a minute. Well, why do you feel that is a problem? So, well, because I said, oh, very good. Well, I tell you what, why don't you, looks like it might be a typo, but why don't you take the problem the way it's stated and do the solution for it? Then look at the solution that was given to you and what would have to change in the problem so that solution was correct. So we got a chance to do that. Then I found in engineering, I don't know. I mean, seems like sometimes it's a little dry. I mean, it's just, there's these equations and stuff, and sure, I mean, that excites people. I mean, some people. But after a while, it just seems like, and you can write anything on paper and kind of convince yourself of something. And so I was like, well, how can I help the students a little bit here and gain a little bit more confidence with this? So then I thought, well, there's a circuit simulator. So what they could do is that they could work it out on paper and do the equations, and then they could put it in the simulator, and then in the simulator kind of verify their equations. And so I thought, well, this is cool because this is exactly what an engineer would do. I mean, you come up with an initial thing, well, I'm the engineer in charge, I've got to verify this. I mean, they're going to come to me saying, is this right? And I got to make sure that it, I've convinced myself that it is right. So they were doing that. Wow. And then as a side benefit out of this, again, as I thought, maybe I had a problem here, but no, what was actually good with this, for a long time, we've been trying to get to the point where they actually spend more time with the material. And so here now, with this error that was there, they had to solve it 2 different ways. So they reinforced those particular concepts, and then they put both of those actually in the simulator, verified that. So they're gaining some pretty good confidence that they understand what's going on there. And so that's where I thought, well, wow. And again, this is another piece that just made it very enjoyable because you're able to interact with the students this way instead of as I say, the mini amphitheater where you don't even know if anybody's really, are they on Facebook? What are they doing? Are they with you? Try to do a few things along the way, kind of gradually go into it. Do look at the other resources. Do look at some of the open source resources that are available. I found that the publishers have a certain concept of what a college textbook is, and they sort of focus on that college textbook. And I'm a ghost author, so I work with a number of the publishers and stuff too, and I'm familiar with how they look at that. I also do like a lot of the open source open educational resources from the standpoint that a lot of those are written by people who actually teach the courses. In not all cases do you have a situation where somebody who teaches the courses are actually writing the books type of thing. And so these are written more from that particular kind of standpoint, and they're closer to the student and help the student out a little bit. But probably the biggest thing, as I'd say, was identify some areas, look at how you can tie your course to the whether course outcomes. I took and did a backwards course redesign. I looked at, well, what do I want them to know 5 years from now? What do I want them to know 2 years from now, 6 months from now, at the end of the semester type of thing? And so kind of looked at it from that. What was the important types of things, and focus on those particular pieces. But also, as I say, just kind of ease into it. Try a few different things. I've been very gung-ho and very confident going into things, and probably taking on a little bit more than I should. So I would kind of caution people not to jump into change too many things at once.
Well, I primarily use the flipped model where students are required to watch the videos ahead of class and then be prepared to work on the material on in-class activities. Well, the students did do better on the grades, and I found that the in-class activities raised their confidence as far as being able to do the statistics. This class is primarily hand calculations of formula, and since many students don't expect to take mathematics and psychology, they're not always confident in their abilities. But in-class activities give them immediate feedback and encouragement that they are doing it correctly, rather than doing the homework at home when they are in the middle of a problem and they don't know what to do. That's a stumbling block for them. So by doing it in class, it worked out really well. The grades did go up. The teamwork in the activities in the classroom worked out very well because the students who grasped the material better were able to help out the students who maybe had a little bit difficulty, whereas the students who were having difficulty were hearing it from another source rather than just me. They were getting it from their peers as well. The flip model is great, but not every student is buying into it. So while they did love the in-class activities and the feedback, they also wanted to be taught. They're used to the lecture style. And because of that, I'm going to change it just a little bit where I might introduce what they're going to be watching in the video for 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the class. Then they'll watch it, but then they'll still come in being able to work on the material. I'm also going to shorten the videos. the idea of doing like 25 minutes just not enough to keep the students engaged. So by chunking it into 7 to 10 minute segments, I think there'll be better buy-in at watching the videos. Be adaptable and be ready to change. You might have great ideas at the beginning, but the student feedback will really be helpful in deciding what you want to keep or not keep. Be transparent with the students. Tell them that you're trying something new and that you're in the process of redesigning the course. And that way, if it doesn't work out, it's not necessarily a personal reflection on you or your teaching ability, but the students are there with you. Ask for feedback as often as you want to. And the students really appreciate being involved in the redesign.
The main thing, I use Zoom in order to try to recreate the classroom experience in a synchronous online environment. One of the things that I really like about Zoom is that some of the features that it has, like for example the sharing screen that allowed me to share with my students PowerPoints or internet or a whiteboard if I'm trying to communicate any examples. So that was one of the features that I really liked. The break room feature also makes it possible to put students in groups so they can work in small groups in different activities. The chat feature also helped me to take attendance, and because I had a very big class, students were able to send me the questions, and I was just checking the chat that they submitted, and then I replied to them. So it was very interactive in that respect. The polling feature is something that I still need to use more, and I guess it would be equivalent to the clickers. And yep, those are some of the features from Zoom that I use to integrate this tool in my online class. The main reason for redesigning the class as an online course was to make it available for more students. Traditional language classes right now we have a cap of 33 students, although the better situation would be to have 15 students. But because of the demand of Spanish to fulfill the foreign language requirement, we need to make available the classes to more and more students. So with the redesign, we tried to have 90 students, and 90 enrolled, and we ended up with 68 students. So that allowed me to double the number of students that were taking the class. The main change is that we don't meet in a physical classroom. This is a synchronous online class, so students still had to meet at certain time on certain days. For us, it was Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1:30 to 2:45, and it's just again trying to recreate the classroom experience, but via this online tool. I started experimenting with this type of conferencing tools several years ago with a graduate class. Students were not on campus. This was a summer class, so they asked me to do an online class for master's students, and I was using Collaborate. So with that, I started thinking, well, this is something that I might try to do with lower division classes. I was always kind of concerned with the very lower division classes because I always believed that for practicing speaking and listening, it's better for students to be in the classroom, in the physical classroom. This is something that is not shared by many other language professors, but I feel that students benefit more when they are in an actual classroom. And I have feedback from some students in other classes that hybrid classes, where students had to meet with their groups online on their own. And some students had come and asked me, can I meet with my students in person because I really need to see their mouth talking. So this is something that still is a concern of mine with these kind of classes. However, the Spanish 7 does not, we don't engage in speaking and listening. It's only reading. In fact, I teach the class in English and Spanish. So being in the classroom wouldn't be a concern. Again, I think it has a lot of possibilities, mainly because if it's well done, and I'm still working on making it better, if it's well done, students, you can get the students to work in groups. What I have, and I know this is some of the later questions regarding obstacles, some of the obstacles is just getting students to work in groups. Also some cheating events that happen, in particular during exams. However, I found that these obstacles are similar to the ones we have in a face-to-face environment. But I think I conducted a survey for my students, and only 24 of the students completed the last survey, and I have like half and half. Half of the students really said, yes, this recreated the classroom experience, is like being in the class. The other half were not as comfortable. But then there is something to say about this, because at the beginning of the semester, the class was intended to be face-to-face. But when we had this huge demand, we had to open up the class for more students, and we didn't have a classroom for that. So I proposed to make this an online class. So that's when I said, okay, let's use Zoom to do this and see if it works. So that was the intention, but because I was not familiar with the class, I wanted to teach the class with a face-to-face modality first, but then I had to do it just on the spot. So the students didn't know. It was a surprise for them at the beginning of the semester, going from a face-to-face environment now, we're not gonna be meeting. So some of them embraced the challenge, some others didn't, and I think this is normal. Many faculty might not like this modality, and many students, doesn't matter how well the class is developed, they might never like it. They really want to have the professor in front in case they want to ask questions. This in terms of the students' perspective, trying to engage them to work in groups. In fact, this was one of the many complaints of some students. I wanted to work in groups, but my partners didn't work. It's like, why didn't you start it? But I think also online classes have this, it allows the students just to turn the microphone and pretend they are not there. It doesn't matter how much you ask, they are not gonna answer. So, and they can say, I was there because my name shows there. So many students really did this. Now, from the perspective of the professor, it was kind of difficult to juggle the different tools, because on one side I had Blackboard, where the students had to work the assignments in Saxity, the quizzes, assignments, group work. But then I have Zoom to manipulate, and then I have my PowerPoint. So just juggling between these three different tools, it wasn't smooth enough for some students. So, and for me, it was kind of difficult, because if I turn Zoom, everything else, Saxity and the PowerPoint went behind. So I was like trying to find where these applications went. So it didn't seem smooth. So those were some of the difficulties and challenges, and I need to work on that. I believe that, and I see it, I saw it, that Zoom, or this online way to teaching, really allows for a personal connection with students, even though many people might think, really, how is this gonna be? And many students question that. But I found that I was able to reply to students in a timely manner, because I was checking the chat, even though I have a lot of students. But also, in a physical classroom, just with 33 students, it's very difficult to get to them. If they are working in groups, you might not get to those who are sitting on the back of the room because there is not enough space and all the chairs are together. Here, I didn't have that problem. I placed them in groups and I could visit each of the individual groups. So it is possible for me to reply to them, to all of their concerns. Also, some students who are shy may not want to answer aloud or ask a question, but they are more comfortable asking a question via chat. So it's really, I was very happy, and that's what I'm gonna continue working on with Zoom with my classes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Peer-assisted learning is a model of peer-led team learning, or PLTL, which is a lauded practice from the National Science Foundation. It's been in practice for about 30 years. Started over in CUNY in New York, and we've adapted it to our campus and the fact that we're a large public institution. PLTL is meant to have an interface of one facilitator to 8 students, and we can't really afford that, so we do one facilitator to about 15 to 20 students, and we were able to put PALs into these 2 classes that did not have them because of the Chancellor's Office money that we received. And it's been pretty amazing because at least Bio 22 had about a 60% failure rate before we went in. And we've improved that dramatically. So it's had quite an effect. One of the hallmarks of the peer-assisted learning program and PLTL is that there's a lot of faculty involvement, which is critical if you're going to sell it to the students as a bona fide intervention, and also if you're going to have the effect on performance and later student success. And so the faculty involvement in this program is really them writing problems and helping to frame the curriculum for the courses. And so to do that, you need to be able to either provide some assigned time or some summer salary or something, and it's hard to find that money. And so we were able to use the Chancellor's Office money to do some of that, to actually get some faculty involvement in writing the curriculum, and then also supporting our student facilitators. So we use undergraduate facilitators to facilitate the sections. And so getting it off the ground and being able to show some early effectiveness allowed us to then appeal to other sources to fund the student salaries from then on. So once the faculty have done their piece in that curriculum development, then we're good. We use that same curriculum then for years to come, but we need that seed money, and we were struggling to find that. So that's how we use the money. Oh my gosh, it's phenomenal. So, and I can speak to both classes individually and to the program as a whole. The program as a whole, we've got several thousand students we've looked at this point, and the improvement in performance within the course is anywhere from 15 to 20% higher. And that is with students who start off equal in both categories. So students who opt into PAL versus students who do not opt into PAL, there's no difference in these students, and we have looked at this exhaustively. So we're not just taking the better students and having them opt into this program. And in some classes, it's actually students who are, at the beginning, you would think would perform at a lower level because their SAT scores are lower, their high school GPAs are lower, and yet they still outperform the students who do not opt into the program. So in terms of pass rate and student grade performance, those are both much higher. Overall course pass rates have also gone up. Those are a little bit more difficult to measure because from semester to semester, the makeup of a course is different in terms of who's in it and who's teaching it and that sort of thing, but we still have had positive indicators there. We're at the point now where we're also starting to look at some of the other factors that we think influence student performance, sense of belonging, self-efficacy, some of the kind of softer impact, but still important indicators in terms of what makes a difference long-term for a student in terms of retention. The other thing that we've been able to show quite definitively is a closing the achievement gap for students. And that's across most of our courses. We have a couple of courses where there wasn't an achievement gap to begin with, but where we've had one, we've been able to either reduce it or close it completely. So
those are all very, very positive impacts. And then something else that is hard to measure, but I think is really, really important. And I think this is the case with most universities, we don't tend to have faculty that look like our students. And in part, that's because the faculty turn over, every 30 years, and the students are turning over every 4 or 5 years. And California is constantly changing. And so we've got this extremely diverse student body. And then I know that sometimes there's that idea of underrepresentation in the students, not seeing themselves represented in the faculty. We've been able to create a cohort of student leaders that look exactly like our student body. And so we've created this level of leadership and importance, I think, in the daily lives of students that not only look like them, talk like them, came from their neighborhoods, but is an attainable goal for students. So, and we've had students say this over and over and over to us. It's all anecdotal, but it's what the students tell us when they interview for the position, that they never thought that they could do something like this, but then they saw someone that was just like them doing this, having this role and this important impact on other students, and so they decided to apply. So we know that we're having an impact like that. Our facilitators are actually more diverse than our student body. So they're over 60% what's considered underrepresented minority. About 65% of them are Pell eligible, and first generation college students, it's over 60%. So we know we are representing any of the at-risk categories that we may have in a very, very positive way. So we're really pleased with that particular impact. It's hard to measure, but we know that that's having an effect as well. We've studied it in a couple of interesting ways. One of the aspects of the program that's kind of unique to what we do on our campus is every facilitator participates in undergraduate research around student success. We do that to both keep them engaged and focused on what matters to students, and also because we are continually improving the program based on what students say and what students want. The student voice is very, very important in this program. And so some of the findings have actually been about the facilitators themselves. And so we had one of our facilitators who's now in a graduate program in engineering, actually, but she went out and polled 20 engineering firms about what they look for in employees, and separately polled our facilitators and said, what do you think you gain from the program? And it was an exact match in terms of the skill sets that the students gain. And then we have a number of anecdotal stories. One of our facilitators just recently completed an internship with the Air Resource Board in Sacramento. And I did a reference for him at the beginning of summer. And the woman conducting the reference call started laughing at the end of it. And she said, we have four different divisions fighting over this guy right now because he's got not only the academic material that we want, the background that we want, but he has so much experience with people and communication and solving problems that are real problems, not an engineering problem necessarily, but a people problem. And so, and I just heard from him, and his internship was great. They want him back during the school year. So we know that this is having that type of an effect on our facilitators, and we're trying to study that. And as you can imagine, it's hard to do that, but we are following all of our facilitators long term. We also have stories from those who've gone into graduate programs in the health professions. So we have a couple that are at different graduate programs at UCSF. One of them, who's there in pharmacy school, texted me on the first day of pharmacy training and said, oh my gosh, we're scaffolding, which is what we do in the PAL program. And they're asking us to solve group problems. Nobody here, none of the students from the UCs know how to do this. And so they're all looking at me because I know how to do this, on a consistent basis because it's what we did in PAL. So we know it's working. We just have to figure out how to measure it a little better. One of the things that has come out of this that I've mentioned is that the student voice is such an important one for us to listen to. And I find it interesting. It was actually one of our former PAL facilitators, former ASI president, Melissa Bardo. She said to me at one point where we came out of a meeting together, and she said, why are the faculty and administrators here constantly deciding what's best for students and not asking the students this question, which is exactly right. I mean, we should be asking the students more. And I know that's a difficult thing to do, but I've found through this program that especially students on our campus, the more responsibility you give them in a supported way, they just shine. I mean, they are amazing in terms of what they're able to accomplish. And so it's made me conscious in my own classes about how much responsibility for their own learning I can give students, which is really what makes them good lifelong learners. We can't possibly teach our students everything they need to know, especially in science, because it's going to be completely changed by the time they graduate. We're going to have so much more discovery. So teaching them how to be really good learners and problem solvers is what's going to make them successful later on. And I've witnessed especially how good they are at doing this if you just allow them a little more freedom in that aspect. And I will say one other thing that's shifted completely in our college because of this program is the atmosphere of how students engage with each other. So if you go to any university, the default engagement of science students with each other is one of competition. They're always, because a lot of them are trying to go to graduate programs, professional programs, whatever. They're very, very competitive with each other, with grades, performance in a course, the lab report. I mean, they just don't necessarily work well with each other because of that culture. The PAL program has shifted that completely, where we have this culture of collaboration that has developed because students they're used to working with each other. And so if they don't understand something, instead of thinking that they're alone and not understanding it, they have learned that they just need to ask somebody and that person's going to help them. And when we've polled our facilitators about what they do outside of their working hours, on average, they are helping students randomly in the hallway 2 hours a week. That's the average number. And you can see them doing this. They just walk by, they see a chemistry book open. Oh, hey, what are you doing? And they sit down with them and start. It's, they just get so used to doing this, and it's just changed the culture. And our dean actually wrote a letter to the National Science Foundation about this because it's been such an abrupt shift in what we're doing. And that's how science really works, is working collaboratively. So it's training our people to actually work in a really effective way. It's not all rosy. You're occasionally going to have challenges with facilitators who don't want to kind of run the program in the way that we believe it should be run. We're very, very careful that our PALs don't ever transition into a tutoring situation. Tutoring is not very effective in the STEM fields. Students need to really find their own way through the material, and if they're just following what someone else says, they're never going to do that. And so we train very specifically on the idea that you're there to facilitate, you're not there to steer the conversation, you shouldn't be showing a student how to do anything. And we observe them frequently to make sure that this is happening. But occasionally we get a student who it's easier to show somebody how to do something. So they default into that. And we've been 100% successful so far in being able to retrain and just encourage them why this is so important and kind of, shift them back into the model that we want. But that's been a challenge here and there. Sometimes, there have been opportunities in the calculus series that are interesting because you sometimes get this group of very squirrely engineering freshmen that are a little crazy. And so it takes a special facilitator to be able to manage that kind of a group dynamic. But again, we've been able to do it. Sometimes it takes, some different approaches and we problem solve our way through it, but that's been pretty good. In the beginning, we had some real challenges with faculty, feeling like we were suddenly going to have students teaching. We had to really make sure people understood that that's not what's happening. And I think we needed to prove ourselves before we really had buy-in by most of the faculty. So I think one of the main things, and I would advise this to anything new, is you start with the true believers, right? You start with the people who are gonna do this and believe in what's gonna happen, and then as the results start coming in, then you start to change people's minds. So, and then of course on our campus, it's always space. Where are you gonna hold these things? And funding, although we've been really well rewarded on this campus by administration who believes in the program and students who believe in the program. So the ASI voice, our student voice, has been incredible in getting this program more funding from the university, and we've applied for external grants with the ASI funding structure and been able to do that. So yeah, so far, but every year. I never know what's going to come. I think starting small is very, very important. We started with one class with a faculty member who believed in us, one class and 4 facilitators. And then we just slowly started adding as things went on. And we've gone into classes where we had a faculty member who really thought it wasn't going to work. And so we just tried to, stay the course and eventually, I think, change their mind. But starting small and just trying to weather the bumps as they come, because there are going to be bumps. There are always bumps when you're trying to implement something new. And it takes a lot of, it's exhaustive. It takes a lot of work. And so you sometimes just have to remember, why you're doing it, and you talk to the students and they're very, very inspiring. But so one class and 4 facilitators, and we're now in 14 classes with almost, I think, 65 facilitators this year. So we've grown a lot. But started very small.
We took the standard class in philosophy dealing with biomedical ethics, which we teach every semester to usually 2 or 3 sections of maybe 40 students each. And we tried to turn that class into an online version, a fully online version, partly to see whether we might reach some students who we don't always reach, partly to see whether we could help convey the same kinds of activities and same kind of enthusiasm for discussion in the online environment that we do in the face-to-face environment. The biomedical ethics class that I had taught for pretty much every semester since I came to campus was one that I have experimented with a number of times, and I really like the fact that the course, even before this online version, was very discussion focused. So I was conveying to students the importance of listening to alternative viewpoints, both within the authors that we were reading and within the students in the class. So we would sometimes have face-to-face debates. We would sometimes have discussions where it was a very structured back and forth between people who had different viewpoints on a topic like, say, physician assistance in dying, something that California has recently had a lot of public debates about in the last few years. Now, to do that in an online environment, it presents certain kinds of opportunities, but also certain kinds of challenges. And so the thing that I felt I really wanted to do was to make the week-to-week practice of the class very similar throughout the entire 15 weeks, so that each week students would know, all right, I'm supposed to read a pro article and a con article on some hot topic in contemporary bioethics. I'm supposed to listen to the professor's short interactions with the relevant readings and giving some background lecture material. And then I can turn the bulk of my focus in a week as a student to interacting with my peers and expressing my own formative opinions about this topic, and then giving feedback to the people within my classroom. Now, the best thing I think that happened about this was, instead of a class of 40 students doing this, listening to all 40 viewpoints, we broke up the class into groups of 10. And so each week, your interactions were with the same 9 or 10 individuals within your small group, and they were expected to read what you posted and give a certain number of replies, both short replies and longer, more thoughtful replies, and then you were supposed to do the same thing for them. And I think that form of the discussion really helped to convey some of the in-class energy that I had experienced with the students in the online environment. Now, this may be getting into the next question that you have, but the nice thing about this is that we have been able to continue to offer this class both during fall and spring, and also during summer and winter. And so by having it in a fully online mode, there's the ability to reach students who might not always be able to come to campus during different times of the year. And it still has at least as many students enrolled over the course of an academic year or a 12-month period as before. Indeed, it's increased. The interesting thing that I talk about in a couple ways would first deal with the beginning of the semester. In the past, before flipping the class to make it online, I would occasionally have students who would wait to purchase the textbook for the first couple days of class to pass, and then they might not get the textbook if they bought it online for a couple days, and that would put them a little bit behind the curve in some of the introductory readings, especially when we're talking about different moral theories. Like certain theories emphasize rights, other theories emphasize good consequences, and you really want students to get off this semester to a good start. One of the things that I did with moving the course entirely online was that I used a textbook that was fully available as an ebook. In fact, it's available for free through the campus library. So students, from the very beginning of the class, even if they're not entirely sure they're going to stay with the class, they can read the material online, they can begin interacting, taking quizzes, watching lectures, interacting with their peers in the discussion board, and they can be fully immersed in the class from the very moment it begins. And I've seen actually the numbers have increased substantially in the first week or two of the number of students who take the quiz and do well on it, the number of students who do these online discussion boards. So I think I've had less students overall dropping the class, but I've also had the students who stay in the class get off to the good start at the very beginning of the semester, which is of course a worry that any professor has, and especially a professor who's trying to experiment with something online, because you sometimes worry, oh no, or am I going to have a radically different enrollment pattern or a radically different dropping and adding pattern? And so far, that sort of element has only been very positive for me as an instructor and for the students who take the class. One of the interesting things that I experienced in developing this class online was a use of some of the materials like the quality analytics and the quality matters that are available through the California State University system-wide. Now, I have improved, I believe, as a teacher in the way that I make my learning objectives more precise, the way that I make my module objectives more related and aligned with those course learning objectives, and just the general approach that I take to analyzing each part of a class. How does this contribute to the overall flow of the class? How does it seem to a student who doesn't already know the material and doesn't already know what college is like? So it's helped me to revisit from the ground up a lot of the ways that I present myself, the ways that I present a course, the ways that I say, here's what this course demands of a student learner, and here's what you can expect on a weekly basis. So I think that it's helped me to put myself in the student's shoes in some new ways that I might not have already done just by sticking with the in-class version. One of the difficulties was that I sometimes assumed a little bit of background knowledge about what students were already familiar with online. That sometimes deals with the course learning environment. So for example, we use Blackboard for this course. I sometimes assumed that a student who was enrolling in this course already was familiar with all the bells and whistles within the current version of Blackboard. And so that assumption is easily correctable because students will email you saying, I don't understand how to use this button, or I don't understand how to do this. And typically that's a problem that can be met really quickly and easily just by putting a couple helpful sentences in the relevant parts of the class so that students can navigate where they need to go. I also experienced the fact that sometimes a student would not read the instructions for a given part and then would come back asking some questions about how do I do this? And so I realized that if I'm not going to give the introduction to the class in person, then I need to have some ways of doing that same kind of welcome to the class, here's what you need to know to get started, here's what to read first, so that students don't feel overwhelmed, but they also take ownership of their own learning. One of the practices I learned from one of my colleagues in the philosophy department, Christina Bellin, is someone who I learned this from, was to create a survey at the very beginning of the class that students were expected to complete, where they said and basically agreed to follow certain practices within the course and to take responsibility for reading the syllabus, and they were not able to access other parts of the course until they had taken this short survey, basically reaffirming that, yes, I'm going to, check in once per week to read the instructions, I'm going to check my announcements, I'm going to do other kinds of things. And I had practiced this in the second or third time of using the course online, and I saw some improvements in the way that students were getting into the syllabus, and they were asking questions. Now, those are somewhat mechanical things. One of the things that I also, this is sort of a difficulty that I now approach all classes with, is that some students, when you want them to discuss something, they thrive a little bit better when they're not expected to answer a question in a face-to-face environment, maybe in front of the entire class. Sometimes they benefit from having a little bit more space to type out their own answer, to hit the delete button a few times, to say what they really want to say and get it out there for their fellow classmates to look at. I had a number of students comment to me that they are in many ways a very shy student, but they felt that this online environment helped to draw them out because they were being asked to do the same kind of discussion exercise as the other 10 people in their small group. They were all in the same boat together, and they knew what they could expect in terms of getting replies from people, and they were less intimidated to share their opinion and listen to other people's opinion in that context, which is good for this kind of a class at least. I would say two things. First, it helps to practice developing a new online innovation or an online course when you've got other people within your subject area who are also experimenting with it or who have recently experimented with it. In my department of philosophy, I was very fortunate to be in a department on a campus where there were several people trying several different things at the same time. We could learn from each other's mistakes. We could laugh about the sort of learning curve in different parts of the transition from taking a class that's face-to-face and very familiar to an online environment where we're trying to experiment with some things and see if they work as well or better. And so just that collaborative context within your own discipline is very helpful if you can get it. The second thing that I would encourage people to do is to take advantage of the campus-wide resources and the Chancellor's Office resources that are available for online innovations and other forms of technological innovations. I just think that we're fortunate to be on a campus where the Center for Teaching and Learning does lots of different kinds of experiments and different kinds of faculty learning groups, and I've taken advantage of those at the same time as taking advantage from the Chancellor's Office grants to try to tweak different parts of my online experience.
So the specific course redesign that I did was funding for flipping a classroom, but there are lots of different ways to flip a classroom. And so my innovative pedagogy was to use a specific structure for flipping your classroom called team-based learning. And team-based learning has 4 major components, and it's similar to flipping your classroom in the sense that students are asked to do some pre-class preparation and they do some hands-on things while they're in the classroom. But it's different because the class is divided into a series of modules, and students are actually asked to take an exam at the beginning of the module to assess basically their preparation to begin that module. And it makes students pretty nervous, but I found that once we got into a good rhythm and using the very well-developed structure of the team-based learning framework, students really gained a lot from that process. They were asked to take on a little bit more responsibility for their own learning, and they worked in teams and in groups to solve complex problems. And in so doing, they gained a lot more confidence in their understanding in statistics, which was a different feeling from my non-flipped version of the class that I'd done previously. I started off with what's called a readiness assurance test. And that's that test that happens right at the beginning of the class. Students are asked to answer some questions based on reading. Did you read it? Did you understand it? And can you do some simple applications of that material that you read? And as a professor, this was an incredibly freeing process because students know how to read and understand material. They just have to do it. And so it freed up time for me in the class to really ask them to do some more complex problem solving. And I didn't have to spend time on telling them what they could read for themselves in the book because I knew that they would read and then be asked questions about it. And then in the second phase of that process, they were then asked what are called application activity kinds of questions, where they work together as a group and they reported out simultaneously their answers to questions. And then usually there was some disagreement across the half a dozen or so groups. And so then they got to discuss why they thought their answers were right and wrong. And it really upped the level of cognitive processing in the class in a way that I didn't really have an opportunity to do when I was simply lecturing and giving exams. So that was really exciting. I did a survey in the beginning and end of the semester on growth mindset. And growth mindset is, if you don't know, is this idea that how people believe their own efforts will impact a particular outcome. So in the student, and this can be measured in a variety of different settings, but in an education and student environment, it assesses the extent to which they think their own studying efforts, their own efforts in class will result in higher test scores or better success, basically. And so I gave this growth mindset survey at the beginning and end of both this flipped classroom, and then I did a control where I was just basically my standard lecture and exam-based format, and found that the students in the team-based learning class, the flipped class, showed significantly greater increases in their growth mindset, and the students in the standard class actually showed a bit of a decrease in their growth mindset. So this was something that I never would have learned had I not had this wonderful funding from the Chancellor's Office, obviously, but also really examined my just standard way of doing the lectures and the exams versus this very new, or not new, but structured way of doing team-based learning. So that was a really exciting finding, that they actually felt that the effort they expended resulted in something positive and tangible. I really enjoyed being able to teach the material that I was teaching at higher levels on, Bloom's taxonomy, right? I mean, when you're in previous courses where I've done lectures and then exams, I really felt that I was sort of hovering around those bottom levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Did you understand what I said and can you remember what I said? And that was essentially what my exams were based on. But with this team-based learning class, I was able to sort of scaffold up higher levels on Bloom's taxonomy and start asking them to apply what they'd learned, evaluate what they'd learned, and ask all those different kinds of higher order complex cognitive processing types of problems. And it made me want to do it in my other classes. It was almost like I had so much fun being able to have those conversations with my students in class that I didn't want to have the conversations that were essentially just, did you read the book and do you understand the book? So it's really ballooned I teach 9 different classes in the psychology department, so I have a lot of opportunity to expand. The most surprising difficulty I experienced was when it came time to do the final exam. The final exam was similar to the types of questions, or the format rather, was similar to the types of questions I was asking during that readiness assurance process at the beginning. But it wasn't restricted to that. It was also multiple choice questions assessing those kinds of higher order processing. And because the students hadn't really had much experience with multiple choice questions in assessing those skills, there was a lot of anxiety associated with the final exam, which math anxiety is not an uncommon occurrence. But I found that the students struggled more than I expected them to because of the conversations we were having during those application activities. It didn't necessarily translate to greater success specifically on the final exam. So I have some ideas to improve that in future semesters moving forward, but that was something I didn't expect and hadn't really planned on. Well, I think I need to give them more example questions. When we're doing our application activities, my thought is to say, okay, if I'm going to ask this in a multiple choice question, here's what this would look like. If you are able to, what you learned today should enable you to answer this type of multiple choice question, moving forward, and just give that to them a little bit more often so they have a little bit more experience with those kinds of questions. I had a wonderful group for my Chancellor's Course redesign, a wonderful team leader and a wonderful group of colleagues. And one of the things that we discussed continually was to be prepared for the students to not appreciate the efforts that you were expending the first time you do it. That to be prepared to receive a bit of a hit in terms of your evaluations because it's the first time you're doing something major like this, but to not get discouraged by it. And I really appreciated that camaraderie, and I would highly recommend for anybody, even if you're redesigning a course outside of this particular course redesign funding program, to develop a cohort of colleagues that are supportive and that you can bounce ideas off of, because sometimes sharing those ideas and being supported that you're not the only one experiencing difficulties is one of the most helpful things as you progress through what can seem like a very long 16-week semester. So that's what I'd recommend.
I introduced using a simulation tool, sort of like a virtual labs type of piece. One of the things I found was with engineers, I smile because it's just a classic thing that we do. I guess it's sort of a human thing where what we want to do is quickly get it all done. And so we would just build up this whole circuit or whatever, and then find out, we call it passing the smoke test. So if it doesn't smoke, then I guess it passed that particular piece. But often it just doesn't work because you need to be a little bit more systematic about this type of thing. So for this course, it's a 64, so it's a lower division type of course. And of course, there are people that are coming into this that don't really have much in the way of any kind of experience and stuff. And so I was trying to look for what are some ways in which I could help them gain some experience, but also give them an engineering kind of approach, or a little bit more systematic kind of approach. So one of the things I found that I did was had them just look up on the internet, research some of these particular devices, these particular circuits that they would be using, and then also be able to put those into a simulator so they could actually verify, in this particular course, it's a truth table, but just these parameters associated with this device. It's supposed to behave a certain way, so can we put it in the simulator and see that it does behave the way it's supposed to? And then be able to build it up on a board, actually physically build the circuitry. And there's some interesting aspects of the pedagogy that you go through there. One thing I tell them is just because it works in a simulator, just because something works on paper doesn't mean it's going to work, okay? And then what we want to do is put that into the simulator, and if it works in the simulator, it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work in reality, but if it doesn't work in the simulator, it probably will not work. Okay, so, but it's kind of like tearing up into what the nice thing about this is they build some confidence as they go through here. They're gaining a little bit more, working with each of these particular concepts and stuff like that, reinforcing those as they go forward. The other thing I found with the class was a lot of students not a lot of students, but I would interview some students. They just felt kind of overwhelmed in the class a little bit. And I said, well, I feel like I'm going to have to, drop out or come back and take the class after I take some more of the prerequisites. I'm going, okay, on the surface that sounds fine, but what prerequisites? The primary prerequisite for this class was some programming that you might have done, and so I said, well, why are they feeling that way? It's easy to sort of dismiss a student or a series of students because of their comments. Oh, well, this is just not right for them, and obviously not everybody's cut out to be, whatever particular, maybe they're not engineers. Okay, la. That bothered me. I don't like that particular type of thing. I don't want to necessarily, it's easy to dismiss that way. I think you have to kind of listen to people a little bit more. And so it's kind of like, why would they feel that way? Well, they're just not as familiar with some of the stuff. It's difficult for us who have been, in the field doing this stuff and not realize how difficult it can be for somebody just walking into it and stuff like that. So it's interesting in logic and engineering and digital, they count ordinally. They count from 0. So instead of so we had a lab 1 and lab 2, so on. So I introduced a lab 0, and it wasn't a nothing lab, but some people might feel like that. But I just wanted them for the first lab 0, and this helps with the start of the semester and everything when they're coming in. This is the first part of the class, to just have them experience a few things, like just take some resistors and put them together, take a meter and just measure some things, hook up an LED, and oh yes, it does make a difference which way you hook it up, and hook up the equipment, go through some YouTube videos and do just exactly what they do in the YouTube video, and just give them a check off on that particular piece. Another innovation I found, well, anyway, before I come back to that piece, and what I found with this Lab 0 was that kind of provided some scaffolding that kind of bridged the gap a little bit. Also, what then I designed into the activities here, the labs, basically was that if they were having difficulty with one lab, they could drop back to the next one and learn a little bit about, and that basically had some tools in it to help them troubleshoot. So they weren't just relying on the lab instructor or hey instructor, my circuit doesn't work, what's wrong with it? So, well, I don't know what's wrong with it. Well, I tried hooking this up, blah, blah, blah. So basically try to empower them a little bit more, engage them, empower them a little bit more. So I found that was very useful, having those particular aspects of the design. Now, another innovation that I did for the course was I found for these activities / labs that they would do, that they would write a lab report, okay? And so this is a traditional type of thing. And what I found was this doesn't work very good as formative assessment for them and summative assessment. I mean, what happens typically here is that they spend some week doing a lab, maybe 2 weeks. They write up the report in a week or maybe 2 weeks, and then they turn it in, and if they're lucky, they maybe get it back in a week or 2 weeks. And so if we look at the short time, that's been 3 weeks. If we look at the outer limit, that's sort of 6 weeks, and sometimes they're lucky if they get it back by the end of the semester. But even at a 3 to 6 week time frame, by the time they get it back, all they're interested in at that point, they don't care about all the red ink that's all over it, all the particular comments that the poor person who graded it tried to put in there. They just want to know what score did they get, are they still passing the course, or do I have to just give it up at this particular point? I found that not too useful, okay? So too long of a time delay, not a good feedback type of mechanism. And really, this is, in engineering, it's the do part. I mean, they're supposed to build things, they're supposed to do things, okay? And so let's focus on that particular part of it. So for the labs, there are certain parts of the labs. And so I have like maybe 3 parts, okay? And so what I invoked into the lab then was, okay, the first part of the lab is just do this. So there's a certain amount of comfort in the fact that if you do just what you are told, you get this result. And so wanted to give them that sort of experience, okay? The second part, change a few things. So they wanted to empower them you could change it, it's okay, it won't blow up, it won't stop, and if it does, you can fix it, and so do that. And then like the third part of this model then was give them some specifications and open it up and let them approach it whatever way they want to approach it. So I found that very useful. So what I did then was I incorporated, instead of just this lab report at the end, then I had these time points in terms of these demos. And so they would need to do demo part 1, they'd need to demo part 2, and then demo part 3. So I could give them that feedback right away as we're engaging with them. And some people say, well, geez, that just doesn't seem to be scalable. How can you do that at an enterprise level where you're having a very large class and stuff like that? You just need to work with it. I mean, it's not as though you need half an hour with each person. In some cases, not even 5 minutes. I mean, you need 15, 20, 30 seconds, and you have some good comments, a good interchange on those particular areas. That's very helpful and stuff. And so then you can cycle through the class a little bit that way. So I found that useful. Also, the way it helped the report was then as they're doing the demo, they're showing me a draft of their particular report. So I can give them feedback on that. So, well, you need to turn in something more than just pictures. Okay, there should be some description here that goes along with this. I know a picture's worth 1,000 words, but I don't see any words here, so I'm not really sure what you're saying. So, there's things like that. Also tried to just shift the course a little bit more towards taking a professional approach to the material. So as a professional, you would want to have your own set of notes. And so, write your report in terms of being able to reduplicate this particular experiment and what did you learn from it. So I found that gave them a lot more interaction and a lot more feedback that particular way. And it set the point range a little bit. So you wouldn't have the situation where people are just trying to cheat, quote unquote, by just basically copying somebody else's report, or you don't know who wrote the report and they just turn that in and then try to do that for the grade. This way, they have to demonstrate some things. And some of the demonstration pieces can be rather quick. I mean, did they light the light? Is it, is the motor spinning? Is it printing this up on the screen? And okay, good, you got that. But it's indicative of a number of things that they would have to do. So it's very important, as I was explaining to a number of faculty, okay, if you're spending more time on the assignment than the student did, there's something wrong. The students are supposed to be doing the learning, and whoever's doing the doing is the one that's doing the learning. So try to shift it in that particular manner.